Hi everybody, welcome to episode number 31, I think. I'm not sure. It's Ike. He's spinning. Hi Ike. Bah! Eisenhower and dynamic conservatism. 52, Democrats choose Stevenson, the witty governor of Illinois. And VP, of course, is Richard Nixon. For Ike, Dwight David Eisenhower. Ike was a grandfatherly figure, was a hero, well-liked, and Nixon labeled Stevenson as soft on communists. Remember that Nixon was a big part of the McCarthy hearings. Truman hated him, remember? Dopey. That's kind of funny. However, Nixon was caught with a secretly financed slush fund. Nixon saved his political career with his Checkers speech about his family and Cocker Spaniel. That was on the video that we watched. They're going to keep the dog. The Checkers speech showed the power of TV. Even Ike did a brief TV spot after that. In a studio, Eisenhower answered some easy questions, which were later edited and spliced together to make it seem he was answering questions in front of a live audience. He clearly defeated Stevenson. This is back in the 50s when the Deep South is firmly in the hands of the Democrats. The whole Deep South, not Tennessee. Okay, Dwight David Eisenhower. Okay, Ike golfed about 150 days per year during his presidency and even had a putting green constructed on the White House lawn, though it was constantly plagued by squirrels. Oh, Ike. Rank number 8. He also liked to golf, like Trump. Ike was an excellent commander who encouraged cooperation. He was the perfect leader after 2+ decades of depression, war, and nuclear standoff. Ike promised dynamic conservatism, socially liberal, financially conservative. That's what my brother is. Socially liberal, financially conservative. Ike decreased spending by cutting defense budgets and transferring agencies to state or private control. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. In other words, fewer rockets, fewer warships, more for the poor, more for the people that are in need. This is a Republican president. That's why the Democrats and Republicans 70 years ago were much more similar than they were different. Ike opposed free distribution of Salk anti-polio vaccine. Not the vaccine, just a free distribution of it. Farmers saw a drop in prosperity after World War II. Farmers always have a drop in prosperity. Their lives never got better. Ike fought illegal immigration from Mexico and sent 1 million back from the Bracero program. Remember, those are the people that we deported them during the Great Depression. Then we asked them to come back in the Bracero program and build weapons, and then we sent them back to Mexico. We haven't been a good friend to Mexico. Ike kept some New Deal programs like Social Security and the unemployment insurance, which are still staples of our society today. And one of his most famous, and it's certainly one of the most important, most famous things that's happened in America. In 1956, Ike supported the Interstate Highway Act, which federally funded 42,000 miles of interstate freeways. That's I-65, that's I-95, that's I-40, that's I-10, all the way across the country. Remind me to show you that. Oh, I don't have to. So FYI, I-10 is down here. It went just through Tallahassee. Jack was right here. And then I-80 and I-90 are up here. And this is where I'm from, literally right there, because I lived right at I-70 and I-75. So what you should know is that it goes like this. Horizontally, I-10, I-20, I-30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. This one's 1, 2. And it starts over here. It's I-5, I-15, 25, 35, 45, 55, 65, 75, 85, 95. they march across the country. That's good to know in your future. I-5 is on the west coast, I-95 is the east coast, I-10 is on the south, and I-80 and I-90 is on the north. Appropriating $425 billion today for the construction of 40,000 miles of interstate highways over a 10-year period, the largest public works project in American history. FYI, it was also very racist by nature, because when they went through major cities, which they all go through major cities, when they go through major cities, Denver or anything else, they built the highway, the superhighway in the city through the black part of town. Through the poor and the black part of town is where they made the city or the superhighway go, intentionally, instead of the white people's side of town. The Eisenhower interstate system. Culture of the car. Car registration in 1945, 25 million. 1960, 60 million. I can't even imagine what it could be now in 2020. Two-family cars, doubles from 1951 and 1958. Remember, just dad was working, and they were able to have two cars. America became a more homogeneous nation because of the automobile, because everybody can get around. Everybody can get back to suburbia. First McDonald's is 1955. What? That's just 7 years before I was born. And now it's like literally one of the biggest corporations in the world. Howard Johnson's, because of cars. They were motels that people stayed in. And then drive-in movies became a huge thing. I definitely went to drive-in movies when I was a kid. Not so many of them now, but, well, now during the pandemic there's more. Ike balanced the budget just 3 of his 8 years in office. 1959 was the biggest peacetime deficit in U.S. history. And the AFL-CIO, Congress of Industrial Organization, labor unions, they combined to work together and be bigger and more powerful. And then, of course, the Civil Rights Movement. Civil rights protect individuals' freedoms and ensure the ability to participate in the civil and political life of the state without discrimination. Put that off here for now. African Americans had civil rights denied by black codes and Jim Crow laws passed by southern states and organizations like the KKK. Jim Crow laws, it's the very beginning of our course, and black codes after the Compromise of 1877. That horrible, terrible thing that we did. Here's a black guy going up to the top of the movie theater because you can only sit in the balcony if you are black. 1896, you have to know. Oh, I thought it was 98. Good to know. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson established the constitutionality of public segregation if separate facilities were equal. They weren't. In the 1890s, when African Americans were energized by the Populist Party and began voting in higher numbers, southern states added voter qualifications to combat this with black codes. Remember that they had the grandfather clause, or they had literacy tests or poll taxes so that they could keep black people, not to mention just physical violence and threat and intimidation to keep black people away from the polls. And it worked. They killed a few people and that's it. It's not like they're going to try to keep going. The states required literacy tests for voting, and black schools were underfunded, intentionally underfunded. So that, laborers, was the only option. The grandfather clause exempted people from literacy tests if their grandfathers voted in 1860, meaning that all the poor white people that couldn't pass a literacy test still could vote because their grandfathers could vote in 1860. But, of course, black people were still enslaved. Early 1900s, 20% of eligible black voters actually did, despite intimidation, discrimination, and poll taxes. That's really freaking impressive. People are getting killed, people are getting beaten, and there were still 20% of the black population were like, I'm voting, I'm voting, I'm voting, I'm voting. There was a thing that I just saw on Facebook yesterday that talked about 2 voters in 1955, that's our era that we're in now, that were killed for encouraging other people to vote, or for voting in a place that they didn't feel like that black person had a right to vote. They were killed in 1955, just killed. Unbelievable. 1955. In the early 1900s, Jim Crow laws continued in the South with near complete segregation. This is all information you've already known. You've already known about this. Colored waiting rooms, lynching and then burning people. Vigilante justice from the KKK in the form of lynching cemented the system. White murderers rarely faced punishments because, of course, they were white juries. And Emmett Till, the people that killed Emmett Till, nothing. Nothing. Black leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP fought injustices despite being opposite perspectives, but few politicians took actual action to help black people. And then you know about Marcus Garvey, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, urging black separation and even possibly a return to Africa. That whatever it is, it's better than here. That was in the 20s. This is all the stuff that's happened before the 1950 Civil Rights era. Our success, educational, industrial, and politically, is based upon the protection of a nation founded by ourselves, and the nation can be nowhere else but in Africa. Of course, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. Few Americans cared about black civil rights, but it helped to inspire change because they loved him. And then 1948, Truman's desegregation of the military helped launch the civil rights movement. That's one of the very first civil rights actions, the first civil rights action by a U.S. president. 1948, integration of the military. And then civil rights, 1950s. In 1950, Sweat versus Painter, the Supreme Court ruled that separate professional schools for blacks are not equal. I think he wanted to go to medical school, and he wasn't allowed to go. Oh, law school. The University of Texas Law School had 6 full-time and 3 part-time professors. The Black Law School had 6 full-time professors. What does that say? I can't tell. The University of Texas Law School had 850 students and a law library of 65,000 volumes. The Black School had 23 students and a library of 16,500 volumes. Not separate, separate but not equal. I could have spent some of the political capital to help blacks, but he did not. Not until he sends in the 101st Airborne Division to Little Rock. And then famously, Congress had not passed a Civil Rights Act since Reconstruction. Only the judicial branch was left to improve black civil rights. Thurgood Marshall is going to help. Earl Warren was appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He shocked conservatives by actively ruling in favor of blacks. People could not believe that he was ruling for blacks. And then 1954, Brown versus Board of Ed. Topeka, Kansas, it reverses Plessy versus Ferguson. We conclude that in the field of education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Justice Earl Warren. Border states generally followed this ruling, but not the Deep South. Nope. It was against the rule. Supreme Court, segregation, it was against the rule. Of course, they're kicking out the black sheep. Highly recommended road. Moderation. U.S. public. Ike ignored the Supreme Court ruling and privately complained about it as judicial activism. That's used all of the time now when they talk about the Supreme Court. And that means that, that would mean if Amy Coney Barrett, who everybody says is going to go in and overturn Roe v. Wade because she's a Catholic and has written about overturning Roe v. Wade, then actually goes in and overturns Roe v. Wade, they would call that, we Democrats would call that judicial activism. And then Rosa Parks. Again, Claudette Colvin was the first Rosa Parks. She was a 15-year-old girl, but she was pregnant. But on March 2nd, 1955, Claudette Colvin sat down on a bus because she was tired and refused to get up. But they didn't use her as the example because she was a pregnant 15-year-old girl, and they didn't want that to become public. So, here you go. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have an image of me as being old then. I was 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. You go, girl. And there you go, MLK Jr. It's the first time that he makes an entrance on the national stage is at the Montgomery bus boycott. MLK Jr. used peaceful methods for civil rights protest, non-violence, civil disobedience. King organized the Montgomery bus boycott after Parks was arrested and became the most well-known civil rights leader. And then Malcolm X also, who believed in by any means necessary. So he was okay with violence at first. Later, after he became a Muslim, he was not okay with violence. Even though they were both murdered. They were both assassinated. MLK created the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and mobilized black churches on behalf of African American rights. Especially Selma, when they marched across the bridge in Selma, Alabama. That was a big thing by the Christian Leadership Conference. Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Civil rights leaders tried to make their suffering known to the public, but the movement did not become successful until white people got involved. So white and black people are protesting. In 1957, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus mobilized the National Guard to block the 9 black students from enrolling in Little Rock Central High School. He's blocking them, the governor. And so Ike sends in the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne Division, to escort the Little Rock 9 to class, asserting federal power over state power. That now they have the Screaming Eagles, the 101st Airborne Division, escorting these kids into that school, despite that Governor Faubus had sent the National Guard to keep them out. Of course, the president won. This is Elizabeth Eckford that we talked about. This is the lady on the video. And these two end up being friends later in life. This lady apologizes for what she was like when she was younger. She got separated from 8 classmates. The crowd, moved closer and closer. Somebody started yelling. I tried to see a friendly face somewhere in the crowd, someone who maybe could help. I looked into the face of an old woman, and it seemed a kind face, but when I looked at her again, she spat on me. I cannot imagine, one, that kind of level of hate at a little girl, but also, most importantly, to be that young woman and standing there in the face of that. That is courage. That is raw courage. That's incredible. I'm proud of you, Elizabeth Eckford. Here's the old man that I told you that sat and stayed with her until she was safe. In 1957, Congress created the Civil Rights Commission to investigate civil rights violations and protect those whose rights were being denied. And then this is going to be a famous painting. Born on September 8th, 1954. She just had a birthday a month ago or something like that. Oh, September 8th. They just celebrated. It was on the news. Ruby Bridges was an American activist known for being the first black child to attend an all-white elementary school in the South on November 14th, 1960. That's only 2 years before I was born. And a little girl is trying to fight for her rights to go to an elementary school. We had integrated schools in the North, but in the South, they fought integration a lot more. And then this is a famous Norman Rockwell painting. Norman Rockwell made this painting. It's just famous. It has a bad word on it. It was on the cover of, I forget the name of the magazine, Life. Life magazine, this big, huge cover. Norman Rockwell's famous painting, The Problem We All Live With, remains an important national symbol of the struggle for racial equality. It's so famous. Of course, now we have the sit-ins. You've heard about the sit-ins? In 1964, black college students launched a sit-in at Greensboro, North Carolina Woolworth's Diner. So if you remember, black people were sent to the back to order food if they were allowed to go to the back to order food. But they could not be served inside the restaurant. Even if it was a black person doing the serving, they were not allowed to eat inside the restaurant. People would pour mustard and coffee and sugar and salt and smash eggs on their head and scream and yell and hit and punch. And these people were just brave, and they stayed there, and they didn't fight back, and they just dealt with it, and then they were arrested. Then they were the ones that were arrested. Absolutely awful. Remember, black people and white people together would do this together. Consequently, other students demanded service at whites-only lunch counters, sparking the sit-in movement. Again, courage. Look at that. Look at all that hate. Just courage. That's amazing. That really is amazing. SNCC. SNCC is famous. In April 1960, the Southern Black Students formed SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, giving focus and force to the civil rights movement. I've told you before, young people, always young people. Eisenhower in the Cold War. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles believed containment was inadequate. He wanted to liberate people under Soviet control. He wants to get them out of Soviet control. The ability to get to the verge without getting into the war is a necessary art. If you are scared to go to the brink, you are lost. It's going to be called brinksmanship. On January 12, 1955, U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles first announced the doctrine of massive retaliation. If it threatens full-scale nuclear attack on the Soviet Union in response to communist aggression anywhere in the world. So we are threatening to massively retaliate, which means atom bombs. Soviet targets in the U.S. Of course, major cities, major cities, major cities. Always major cities. Red means you're dead if something lands on you. Blue is a fallout zone, you're probably dead soon. And yellow, maybe you're safe, depending on the wind. The U.S. built a fleet of super bombers called Strategic Air Command, which were capable of dropping nukes anywhere in the world. In 1955, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact, but the Cold War seemed to be thawing. It wasn't, but it seemed to be. Don't forget, the opposite of the Warsaw Pact for us is NATO. NATO is the opposite, and that's the capitalist and democratic countries. Khrushchev. This is Khrushchev. Ike planned arms reductions, and the Soviets were surprisingly cooperative. New leader Nikita Khrushchev denounced Stalin's brutality. It's called de-Stalinization. So he's right after Stalin, and he denounces a lot of the crimes that Stalin committed. Remember, he killed like 60 million of his own people. Bombs do not choose. They will hit everything. Nikita Khrushchev saying, we're happy to fire bombs back. In 1956, the Hungarians revolted against the Soviet Union and appealed to the U.S. for help, but we did nothing. So here's the problem. We have promised a containment of communism. We have promised the Truman Doctrine that if you are being taken over by the communists, we will come in and help you. So in 1956, all of these students, always young people, always students, always young people, a lot of young people, they rebelled against Stalin and communism in the Soviet Union, knowing the United States would come in and help, and we didn't. And we didn't. It's sad. They got crushed as a result. The bloody Soviet crushing of the Hungarian revolt raised tensions to a very high extreme, and we didn't go help them. About the capitalist states, it doesn't depend on you whether we Soviet Unions exist. If you don't like us, don't accept our invitations, and don't invite us to come see you. Whether you like it, where's the rest of it? No, I don't know where the rest of it is. Khrushchev's Shoe, it's famous, famous, famous book. In October 1958, the U.S. and Soviet Union promised to end dirty testing of nukes, but it was hard to regulate. So we say we're not going to test nukes. People still tested nukes. Ike and Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. Stalin died in 1953. Khrushchev was invited to Camp David for talks, and the Soviet Union offered disarmament. Everybody disarm. The reason it doesn't happen is because we refuse to disarm. He's like, well, if you're not going to disarm, we're not going to disarm. And then in 1960, the U-2 spy incident ended talks because a U.S. spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union and the pilot was captured, and we tried to act like it was a weather plane, and we lied, and we didn't know they had the pilot. And so they knew. They knew we were lying. 4 days after the U-2 was shot down by the Soviets, NASA issued a very detailed press release noting that an aircraft had gone missing north of Turkey. The press release speculated that the pilot might have fallen unconscious while the autopilot was still engaged, even falsely claiming that the pilot reported over the emergency frequency that he was experiencing oxygen difficulties. Not true, not true, not true. After learning of this, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev announced to the world that a spy plane had been shot down but intentionally made no reference to the pilot. As a result, Ike's administration, thinking the pilot had died, authorized the release of a cover story that the plane was a weather research aircraft which had strayed into Soviet airspace after the pilot had radioed difficulty with oxygen equipment while flying over Turkey. The Eisenhower White House proclaimed that there was absolutely no deliberate attempt to violate Soviet airspace and never has been, and attempted to continue the facade by grounding all U-2 aircraft to check for oxygen problems. On May 7th, Khrushchev sprang his trap and announced, "I must tell you a secret. When I made my first report, I deliberately did not say that the pilot was alive and well, and now just look how many silly things the Americans have said." He totally tricked us. There he is, Francis Gary Powers, the pilot. The U-2 incident marked the beginning of the most tense period in Cold War history. That we were lying and they caught us lying to the world. And then we'll talk about the Middle East next time. Bye.